One of the greatest experiences in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one that I encourage everyone to try to do at least once, and that's going to events, whether or not it be regionals or YCSs or even just local events. There's nothing quite like playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! In real life with real cards with some sort of prize on the line. Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro and Dueling Book can't quite measure up to how fun it is to actually play this game in real life. However, as with all things in life, there are rules and regulations for Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments, and I'm not talking about the obvious stuff. You can't really show up intoxicated to a Yu-Gi-Oh! Event. I think most people know that, but in today's video, I want to talk about 5 maybe not so obvious things that I see people that only play casually and then they go to their first competitive event, and these are things that I see people actually doing. These are things that I've seen multiple times throughout my years of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I thought it'd be helpful to make a video talking about these 5 rules that you can't actually do, that you're not allowed to do, just in case you're going to your first Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament and you don't want to be caught in an awkward position where you're accused of cheating or anything of the sort. And I know that in the case of every single rule that I'm going to talk about in today's video, the people that are doing these that are maybe more casual, they're not doing them maliciously, they're just doing them because they don't realize that they're against the rules. But the reason that these things are against the rules is because they all give players unfair advantages, and even though you might not be using it in that way, Konami has to ban them just as a blanket statement so that not everyone can sort of abuse the system. So in all of these, if you do any of them, that's perfectly fine. Just realize when you go to official tournaments that you can't actually do them, and hopefully I'll be able to explain why that is for each of them on the list. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump right in with number 5. Did you know that you can't actually use your phone as a calculator for any official games? I know it sounds crazy. I know that many people enjoy using the Yu-Gi-Oh! Calculator applications out there, but it's actually not allowed. And technically speaking, you're not even allowed to use a normal calculator to keep track of life points. You can use a calculator for calculations, but you're supposed to keep track of life points on pen and paper. And the reason is that on pen and paper, you can go back if there's a life point dispute and actually look at every single change that was made. Now, in the case of some calculators, for example, I use a TI-84 calculator, you can actually go back and look at every single change, but Konami has just they haven't banned calculators, but they have banned phones. And the reason they have banned phones, even though just like a TI-84 calculator you can go back and look at the life points, is that you can't really control if your friend from the other side of the table texts you things from your opponent's hand or your opponent's back row. How do you do that situation? Do you ban the person that sent the message? Do you ban the person that got the message? What if your friend does it to purposely get you kicked out of a tournament? Maybe they're not so much of a friend as they are an acquaintance. There's all sort of these weird situations that can come up. So you can't have a phone on the table face up at an official tournament. Maybe you don't plan on doing it maliciously, however, you can't really control what your friends send you. And yeah, there's sort of a workaround with having people put airplane mode on their phones, but it's really hard to actually enforce that. So just as a general rule of thumb, don't have your phone on the table, and if you have a calculator on the table, try to have a pen and paper as well. Now, in general, you'll still see a lot of people just using a calculator, but technically, you're supposed to use a pen and paper for the official track of life points. Next up, I'm going to talk about a ruling that I see tons of times happen because, and I usually try to catch this before it happens, but for some people, the way that they determine who goes first and second, usually people that are just playing casually, they look at the bottom card of their deck and their opponent's deck, and then maybe they picked like whoever has the lowest alphabetical letter, they get to go first or second. Maybe it's the highest, or maybe it's whoever reveals a monster with the highest attack points, something along those lines. And they do this instead of doing rock, paper, scissors or rolling a die, but at official tournaments, you have to use a random method of doing it without revealing information about your deck or your opponent's deck. And like I said, I try to catch this before it happens if I notice my opponent start to lift my deck up and look at the bottom card, but you can't actually do that. You might be doing it innocently, but at the top tables, knowing information not only about their opponent's deck, but also what's on the bottom of their deck is a huge deal. So this is not allowed in any tournaments, and you'll be in a lot of trouble. Maybe not a ton of trouble. You won't get immediately disqualified, but you'll definitely have to explain to a judge why you did that if you do that at an official event, because it is technically cheating and against the rules. So just don't do that. Just roll a die like most people do. That's what the vast majority of Yu-Gi-Oh players are doing at competitive events. They just roll a dice or 2 die, and then they just do whoever gets the highest roll gets to choose first or second. At number 3 on this list, I have something that I think gives a lot of newer players into competitive scene game losses, even though once again they're not doing it maliciously, and that's that you're not allowed to have any Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the deck box other than cards written on your deck list. So for events like regionals and YCSs and WCQs, you have to submit a deck list to Konami, and anything that's not on that deck list, even if it's from like your entry packs, even if it's not in sleeves, you cannot have in whatever deck box you're using for that strategy. The times where I see this come up the most is when newer players use tins as deck boxes. They keep their decks in there, they keep their extra decks in there, their side decks in there, but because there's so much extra space in the tin, they just throw their entry packs in there, maybe even a second deck entirely. This is a no-go and actually will give you a game loss, not just a stern talking to, so you definitely got to watch out for that. Just use one deck box for whatever was on your deck list and put all other cards in other spots. Now at some tournaments, Konami is extremely strict about this, not even allowing you to have OCG Yu-Gi-Oh cards in your deck box, but if you have token cards or field centers, just make sure that they are clearly token cards and field centers. It's pretty much the ruling at most events if the judges actually care. If you have a normal Yu-Gi-Oh card or an OCG card as a token, you have to physically write on the card with Sharpie very clearly token. I actually almost got a game loss at an event for having an OCG painful decision in my deck box that my friend gave me and not having token written on the card. So definitely make sure there's nothing in your deck box that is not on your deck list. At number 2, we have a discussion that comes up not so much at regionals and YCSs, but that I see posts all the time about in locals, and that's that you are not allowed to use proxy cards. No matter how good they look, no matter how real they feel, you can't use fake cards in your duels. And I know that Yu-Gi-Oh is expensive. I know that some cards in this game, like Infinite Impermanence and Ash Blossom, are staple cards, and yet they have huge price tags, sometimes even more than your whole deck combined. However, you can't use proxies in official duels because that is sort of invalidating the people that took the time to actually spend the money on their own cards. It doesn't matter if you're just playing at locals because everyone else at that locals paid for their cards, and I know that seems unfair, but if everyone could use proxies and print proxies, no one would buy real cards and then the game would die. I know you might be thinking, well no, how about just only the people that can't afford the cards print proxies, but you can't really make that line. You can't sort of do that to players. You just have to put everyone on the same ground, and in that case, if one player is allowed to use proxies for certain cards, then every other player is also allowed to use proxies, and then the game just kind of collapses. At a locals, who's going to buy any cards that the locals is selling if everyone is just using cards that they printed off at their printers? So you can't use proxies at official events. And like I said, I don't think this comes up super often at regionals and YCSs, but it's a discussion I see in very many locals Facebook groups, as well as on like Zodiac Duelists, from people saying, should I use proxies at locals? Can I use proxies at locals? The answer is no. And lastly, one of my biggest pet peeves in Yu-Gi-Oh is looking at the top card of your deck while your opponent is doing combos. Now, in most cases, the people that are doing this aren't doing it maliciously. They're doing it to see if they should just scoop immediately to their opponent that's doing the combos to go to the next game, but you cannot do this. I know I've made videos discussing about why you shouldn't do this. If you lose the game, you shouldn't look at the top card of your deck, but in the case of if your opponent is doing some crazy wombo combo and your hand currently can't out that combo, you can't look at the top card of your deck to see if you're drawing a sphere mode or a kaiju or anything like that. That is totally against the rules. I don't know how people think that's okay. That happens at regionals all the time, and it just blows my mind how people don't call judges for that. If your opponent looks at the top card of their deck at any point, call a judge over and make them get a game loss, because that is ridiculous. You can't have information like that for free. You have to use card effects that make you look at the top cards of your deck. You can't just look at the top card of your deck whenever you want, even if you're doing it just to know if you should scoop to the next game. The players that are deciding in games 1 and 2 while you're doing your combo if they should just go to the next game should do so with a strategic mindset, not one that lets them know what their next card is. Anyway though, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's discussion video about 5 things that you can't do at Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments. I know in many of these cases you're probably not doing them maliciously, you're just doing them innocently. How many times have I said maliciously this video? A lot. I must be a Destiny Hero player today. But you can't do these things because if one player can do them, then every player can do them, and the players at the top tables would abuse these rules if they weren't in place. I'll see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.